There are people who
if you can close.
Who does not need an introduction, and there are people who apparently doesn't want to be introduced, and Niklas is one of them. So he wants just to say me to say that he comes from Helsinki, from the university there, from the Department of Philosophy, and that's it. So, and he's going to talk about his talk is entitled From Alienation to Responsibility, or Alienation as a Responsibility. So Niklas, can we do something with these lights?
I think somebody is doing.
Yeah,
and I'm a little bit taller, so it comes. Anyway, is my voice loud enough? Okay. So thank you for having me here. It's really a great pleasure. I was thought that I would begin with some preparatory remarks and apologetic remarks, but I'll leave those behind, and maybe just say that there might be, as a kind of warning, that there might be things which might sound or feel for some repugnant or repulsive, but bear with me, hopefully, to the end. Okay. So I'll begin by introducing the landscape in which this talk will move by putting forward, unfortunately in an all too hasty manner, a somewhat grand claim, namely that philosophy is characterized by a three-step movement consisting of 1, departure or disruption, 2, discovery as rediscovery or recollection, and 3, return. And moreover, that this three-step movement comprises a form of alienation or an acknowledgement of a form of alienation, insofar as alienation cannot conceptually be said to constitute a full-blown bewilderment or a full-blown loss of sense and context, but is rather dependent on its tie to where or what it has become alienated from, and likewise always anticipates a resolution or a new becoming. Well, it's perhaps not all too controversial to say that philosophy begins with a kind of disruptive moment. Something is or becomes out of joint, so to speak, in the course of everyday life. This disruption inaugurates a departure from the secure ground on which one stood, setting one on the path of clarification. The second step is, however, less self-evident. Now, despite the necessary oversimplification and violent generalization which this will include, I will nonetheless say that the understanding philosophy discovers itself to be seeking, that is, the understanding which answers to the very event of the disruption and departure, is something always already embedded in the words we use and understand. It's something always already there in the way in which experience and the world structures themselves for us, or something which already is there in what conditions experience or the world for us. In short, philosophy finds its mode of clarity not in any new knowledge or a new piece of information, but in something which was always somehow already there. Now, this is arguably the case from Socrates or Plato to St. Augustine, Descartes, Kant, phenomenology, psychoanalysis, Wittgenstein, and so forth. Grand claim, of course. I'm very aware of that, but bear with me. As must be observed, however, this discovery as rediscovery or recollection is something that is not something that undoes the structure of alienation caused by the disruption and departure. Rather, it in fact inaugurates a new form or a new event of alienation, namely the self-understanding which emerges from philosophy, or which philosophy promises, implies claiming or redeeming as its own self-understanding something that is both beyond and prior to the self. Perhaps there's no better or more poetic picture of this than the one found in Plato's Theaetus, where the interlocutor's rational soul is pictured as conceived into the world from the very words or for the very desire of the interlocutor himself, assisted by the love and friendship of the midwife Socrates. Or as we might say, it's as if the cut made by Socrates' interventions on his interlocutor was the very womb from which the soul is conceived. And perhaps we find no better or more poetic formulation or formalization of this logic than Freud's Wo es war, soll ich werden. Sorry for my terrible German. It's of course this discovery as rediscovery, or perhaps better said now, discovering as claiming, as redeeming, which determines the destiny or the path of the subject or soul as one of return. However, the fate of this return hinges on how we come to understand the sense of this rediscovery or recollection. Now, our next move, which in the context of this conference might be a somewhat unexpected one, is to turn to Ludwig Wittgenstein's later masterpiece, The Philosophical Investigations, not the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, that is, which is perhaps more known on the continental philosophy at least. More precisely, we shall turn to the opening scene of this work, one which constitutes both a primal scene or a mythology of language and meaning, and a primal scene of the work itself. Now, the scene is taken from Augustine's Confessions and reads as follows. When they, that is my elders, named some object and accordingly moved towards something, I saw this and grasped that the thing was called by the sound they uttered when they meant to point it out. Their intentions were shown by their bodily movements as if it were the natural language of all peoples, the expression on the face, the play of the eyes, the movement of other parts of the body, and the tone of voice which expresses our state of mind in seeking, having, rejecting, or avoiding something. Thus, as I heard words repeatedly used in their proper places in various sentences, I gradually learned to understand what objects they signified. And after I had trained my mouth to form these signs, I used them to express my own desire. Now, there's really nothing odd or surprising about this scene as such. Such primitive ostensive practices certainly do go on when we teach and learn language. And yet, at the same time, as an explanation or as an account of language and meaning, it is completely empty, and not simply empty, but in some ways paradoxical, or should we say queer. Now, I shall identify three different elements of work in this scene. First, we have the elders, who in the position of the guardians of language teach or facilitate the norms, rules, and conventions of language, that is, the correct words of use to the infant. Then secondly, we have the individual, in this case the infant, who must, in order to be able to find itself, to find its desire in language, it must abide to the rules of language provided by the authority of the other. Well, here of course we have what in analytical philosophy of mind and language, for instance, is usually referred to as the internalist-externalist debate. Or more generally put, what we have here is the potential or even the inherent tension between the individual and the collective. So how, one might ask, for instance, are the intentions and desires of an individual ever able to be carried by the language of the other? Yet even more pressing, or as an inherent feature of this tension, is that these two elements of the primal scene or mythology are unable to account for the meaning and understanding language nevertheless is supposed to yield and support. In the investigations, there's constantly something disrupting or lacking in the signifier-signified relation. So when the field of the other attempts to claim meaning as its own sovereign property, the rules, the criteria, the conventions which constitute the structure of language of the other, and the correct judgments that these require in order to mediate the signifier-signified relation constantly fail to fill the gap between the signifier and the signified, and to get, so to speak, meaning and understanding off the ground and into circulation. One might, for instance, paraphrase the paradox or the failure of the other, which Wittgenstein continuously and in different ways articulates in the investigations, by the simple question: what would be the rule or the method by which to determine how that is to say, how all rules or rules as such must be followed, and what would determine the correctness of such a rule. Now, on the other hand, when a voice in the investigations hopefully attempts to rid meaning of the field of the other and thereby fill the signified gap, an unexpected short circuit appears. The suggestion is that language, the suggestion here in the scene, in the investigation, is a language where the private sensation of an individual would be the signified, and the signifier a sign whose rules are fully determined by the signified, that is, not tied to the field of the other and its rules and conventions. The other, however, refuses to leave the scene exactly at the point where the desire of language, that is, the desire to say something to someone else, is revealed to be eternal to the very fantasy of the private language idea proposed. The lesson learned is thus that if language is to be tied to desire, then any private inner object drops out as irrelevant to language and meaning, and we do not seem to be able to disentangle language from desire, as the investigations is forced to note over and over again. So the crux of the tension between the two elements so far identified as pertaining to the Augustinian primal scene of mythology is that whereas both of them certainly do have their irreducible place in language, they do not, either alone or together, function in getting meaning and understanding off the ground. Neither one can stand alone, yet together they constitute a gap. Enter then the third element. Now recall this passage from the opening scene, and I'll quote it again. Their intentions were shown by their bodily movements as if they were the natural language of all peoples. The expression of the face, the play of the eyes, the movement of the other parts of the body, and the tone of voice which expresses our state of mind in seeking, having, rejecting, or avoiding something. Now, as one voice points out in the early passages of the investigations, quote, I think we can say, Augustine describes a learning of human language as if the child came into a strange country and did not understand the language of the country. That is, as if it already had a language, only not this one. Indeed, this is exactly what the primal scene depicts. However, and this is a crucial point, nowhere throughout the investigations is this point of the givenness of language or understanding overcome or explained away. Instead, we find the interlocutors of the investigations forced to concede from time to time, for instance, that, quote, explanations come to an end somewhere, or this is simply what we do. As we might say, the conclusion of the investigation seems to be that meaning and understanding are always already internal to any and all mythologies of origin. Moreover, the decisive feature of this third element is not simply that the infant already had a language, that it already understood its parents. For the full consequence of this is that the functioning of language in the primal scene hinges on an always already present understanding and shared meaning between the infant and the parent. Without it, not even the simplest case of ostensive definition could function. So let us say that the investigations brings to light that the unbridgeable gap between the signifier and the signified is paradoxically rooted in an always already present understanding and sharing of meaning embedded in the very way in which we are, inescapably and unconditionally, addressed by each other. That is, we are always already addressed by each other in such a way that it makes the knowledge of this address impossible. Or simply put, we cannot account for the fact that we are addressed by each other as subjects of signifiers as such. Well, we have, as many have noted, slid or slipped from Wittgenstein to the vocabulary of Lacan. Now, I shall not thematize this slide or slippage any more than by noting that I will simply allow myself to use, and perhaps, no doubt, to misuse Lacan here, just as I have undoubtedly for many misused Wittgenstein. So I will take the liberty of going on as if nothing significant has happened in this slide or slippage, and say that I find at the heart of Lacan's analysis of subjectivity a similar kind of paradox as identified in Wittgenstein just now. Namely, I find a kind of simultaneous incommensurability and inseparability between the subject of what I will call here determinate signifiers on the one hand, and the subject of the signifier as such on the other. Let me put it this way. Certainly, I'm always necessarily recognized as the subject of this or that signifier, or as the assemblage of a host of signifiers. In other words, I cannot be recognized as a subject without determinate signifiers. However, at the same time, each recognition of the subject of determinate signifiers supposes, or presupposes, that one has already recognized the other as a subject of the signifier as such. That is, it presupposes that one has always already been addressed by the other as such. One might say unconditionally addressed. Consequently, we can say that whereas each recognition of the determinate presupposes the recognition cum address as such, the subject as such nevertheless does not have, or cannot have, any singular or exhaustive signification. Now here I'm reminded of something Lacan observes or reports in his Seminar 23, the symptom, namely that, quote unquote, every single subject in analysis reveals how he is always and only ever a supposition. Moreover, it is the event of the signifier as such which constitutes the subject's desire as the other's desire. Since neither the individual nor the other know what, or cannot know what, grounds the inescapable address and response between the self and the other, that very thing, let's call it the object cause, might therefore be said to be fully contained in the other's desire, which is of course to say that the cause, the subject of the signifier as such, is not a thing, a substance at all, but exactly, in epistemological terms, more like a supposition. Let me now try to spell out what sense I think subjectivity is let me now try to spell out in what sense I think subjectivity is always a claiming or an owning up to subjectivity. And if I have to some degree made reference to Wittgenstein and Lacan so far, what I will say from here now on, I'll take full responsibility for. Meaning that I'm leaving Wittgenstein and Lacan in that sense behind me. With reference to what was said in the beginning about Plato and the soul being born out of the womb produced by Socrates' interventions, I want to propose that in a primal or mythological sense, the all-powerfulness of the response of the other, this is a Lacan's term, which is invoked by the inescapable address, makes a cut or a wound in the phantasmatic undisturbed completeness of the primal address. Yet this wound shows itself to be, in fact, the womb from which the subject, the one who addresses, steps forth. Now certainly, we do not choose to be expressive beings who inescapably address each other, or address others, just as much as we do not choose to be inescapably and unconditionally addressed by others. Something, and it, causes all of this. However, the thing is just that to the extent there is to be a subject, to the extent that I am someone and ceases to be an it is exactly I who no longer simply causes the other to respond or is caused to respond, but rather I am or become responsible as the one who addresses the other and the one who responds to the other, although I have never chosen to do so, but neither have I not chosen it. It caused the all-powerfulness of the other's response, yet I am the one who the other, the you, responds to. Notice how there's a further level of redeeming or owning up to here. Namely, not only does the subject crawl into existence out of the wound or the womb produced by the other and find itself called to redeem the place of the one who addresses the you, that is, the one who is unconditionally recognized or loved by the other. For becoming a subject of the signifier as such also contains the redeeming, claiming, or the claiming, also contains redeeming or claiming the position of the all-powerfulness of the response of the other. In short, what we as subjects are called to own up to is that we are also addressed unconditionally by the other, and that we thereby, as subjects, deliver or give unconditionally existence, subjectivity to the other. Terrible as it may sound, it seems that we do indeed need to redeem that we love each other unconditionally. Now, if you're following me so far, which of course presupposes that what I'm saying makes sense, then I want to continue by noting that the landscape I've drawn up of the subject here suggests two different asymptotic paths along which the subject might travel. Let me say this first, however. I have indeed proposed that the subject is constituted around a certain kind of lack, an impossibility. However, the incommensurability I have identified as grounded on the impossibility, however, the incommensurability I have identified is grounded on the impossibility of not receiving and delivering unconditional love or recognition. That is, it's grounded on the lack of the possibility of not receiving or delivering it. Consequently, the path of the, let's say, hysterics discourse, which is predicated on the phantasmatic belief or the struggle to collapse subjectivity into identity, or unconditional recognition into recognition of determinate signifiers, is, I propose, the disavowal of, and ultimately the repression of, not the impossibility of receiving unconditional love, but rather the opposite, namely the impossibility of not receiving it. Now, the other path, the path of redeeming subjectivity, is, however, not a path towards a final fulfillment, a final satisfaction. As one might put it, the incommensurability is real. Now, I thought I would try to articulate the sense of the second, or what I propose to be the second asymptotic path, by saying something about normativity. How am I doing with time, by the way? Fine. So, does then this strange thing I'm calling unconditional love have any normative content? I think the answer has to be the inconsistent one, namely yes and no. Let us take as our starting point Levinas's famous proposition that the inescapable claim of the face of the other contains the primordial or primal command, "Thou shalt not kill." Now, perhaps this is so. Only that, I propose, what must be added here is exactly this "as such." Unconditional love, as I have wanted to place it, simply means that we cannot want or desire anything bad, say pain and suffering, as such for the other. We want, we desire the good to the for the other as such. In other words, unconditional love determines or is the telos of a speaking being. However, and this is the crucial point, whereas we cannot want, say, pain and suffering as such for others, we can have good reasons for causing this to them. And ultimately, even good reasons for killing the other, perhaps at least. Conversely, and because the good, that is to say, what I'm calling unconditional love, is the telos of the speaking being, each act of evil will necessarily justify itself with an appeal to the good. Language simply does not allow for the possibility of wanting pain and suffering or death as such for the other. And note also that if it is so that we do not want as such to kill the other, then the desire to kill the other as such will be the primordial manifestation of the repression of our unconditional love, a desire, however, forced to be justified as good or necessary. But how then does unconditional love stand in relation to good and bad reasons? Certainly, the notion of justice stands out as a pinnacle of normative discourse. That is, the notion of justice can be said to be the central criteria for discerning between good and bad reasons, that is, between justified and unjustified reasons. Moreover, central to normative discourse or ethical discourse is the articulation of the criteria for what counts as just and what not. However, what must be presupposed in order that our criteria for justice is just is that we already are just in our assessment and in our desire. The definite split or incommensurability between love and the signifiers of law is that the very means by which we are to discern the extent to which the criteria of justice, say, has been satisfied is part and parcel of the very moral existential strength the criteria themselves call for. Basically, this is a kind of a stopping place for me, but I'll just raise two. This is like a epilogue. Let's put it like this. The question that follows here, for me at least, is the question: if what I said just now is so, then how do we go about with the question? So, can we be good? If my proposition is that in order for us to be able to give criteria for, or let's put it this way, any criteria that we would be able to articulate for what would be just or not just or good or bad presupposes that it's supposed, so to speak, to already articulate. So the criteria cannot give us, so to speak, the goodness that it, as it were, tries to articulate. So the question is, can we be good? And I would say that there's I'm taking two passages from the New Testament that somehow haunt this question. So first, when a man approaches Jesus and calls him a good person, Jesus laments him by saying that only God is good. Now, something like this is implied in what I've been saying. Perhaps we can put it this way, that claiming or redeeming the position of the one who loves unconditionally is always a radically unprecedented event, which means that it's something which we do again and again and again all the time. That is to say, to make sense of what that unconditional love is. Now, the second one, which seems to be a kind of different one, is the weird or terrifying call that Jesus, as it were, inflicts on us, which is I don't know I can't remember the exact quotation, but something like be perfect as thy Father in heaven. So maybe I'll stop here and leave you with this.
Thank you, Niklas, for this interesting presentation. So, questions? Yeah.
Is this working?
Not yet. Take mine.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know what we were supposed to find repugnant, but I didn't.
Maybe
think
the
was
talk on love. That was because
I mean that is
yeah.
my question actually. I don't know. Actually, what motivates this determination of, let's say, the absolute priority of the symbolic order as universal love? I mean, I think of that more as like I like universal love. It's like a John Coltrane thing. That's the way that I think about it. But I don't know. Lacan says man is an animal tortured by language. And so Kant, shows, and I think it's true, that the only ground for the intelligibility of what morality could be at all is the categorical imperative. That is, you have to think that you're doing something that you can think others ought to do were they in your place, that otherwise it's unintelligible to differentiate morality from inclination or desire or whatever, and I think that's just a fact. That is, I think it's correct philosophical determination of what morality is. So that implies a ground of accountability for the universalizability, I suppose, of one's actions. But I don't know why but I would distinguish that from, as it were, the facticity of our being preceded by language, where Lacan says, okay, yeah, the symbolic order is already there. There are libraries filled with books, etc. When we come into the world, it precedes us absolutely. But why? But I guess my question is, why is that determined as being put in a position of having to receive universal love? Why should it be? Why is it determined as love? What justifies the? Yeah.
Well, at least I think I mean something else. I don't think that the universal, that it's universal. Because it's an open question what universal love means, and I don't think that it's something which is in that sense determined or implied by the symbolic order as such. For me, it's rather this question of of being the signifier as such, and that the symbolic order is simply, which is of course true. You take the very simple thing is that in that sense, in order for me to take you as saying anything at all, it's of course that we have language, of course, but in order I already have to somehow be addressed by you, and that address in itself doesn't. This was my point, that the address in itself is not the symbolic order, and that's where I want to, as it were, place this unconditional love, because my point is that it's not that if what I somehow seem to be, or Lacan seems to say something of this sort, that there's this kind of, that the lack that we're conditioned around is that, I'm always trying to, what was that cause that caused you to at all be addressed by me? What's that thing, And then I start searching for it. Anything you say, will not suffice. It won't satisfy me. And that seems to me, so you can think that of that as a kind of impossibility that we, in factual sense, never have or never receive unconditional love or unconditional recognition. But I would say exactly the opposite, that we cannot not receive it. And that is what makes us tormented by language.
Oh, can I jump in? Can I jump in? Okay, yeah. You already answered, but I will rephrase the question. I was somehow struck that you apologized in advance for the ending. I simply don't agree with you, but I don't find it repulsive. I find your lecture actually quite stimulating, and I myself am departing from many similar ways. But where we part ways is approximately as a Lacanian. I firmly believe that we are somehow alienated in language, and then we cannot do it without it. And that's the problem, because for Lacan starts that every communication somehow implies that you don't know what the other wants from you. Que voi? And you could come to the similar conclusion by way of analytic philosophy. For instance, you mentioned Wittgenstein and the rule you can follow. You are certainly familiar with Kripke's skeptical paradox. Sure. How do I know that this is the rule? This is addition plus and not cus. So you're always puzzled in a communication. And for Lacan, therefore, communication is you are receiving from, well, I won't go into that. So it just doesn't need to. What I wanted to say is that there are ways how very language is structured and how it is used that you cannot avoid. For instance, a question, the form of a question. There's a fine book by Aaron Bodenheimer, Swiss psychiatrist. It was published in the 80s and it's translated in Slovene. And it's called Warum von der Obszenität des Fragens. The point that Bodenheimer makes is that the question itself, in its very form, is obscene. The aim of every question, majority of them is to somehow lay bare your secret, agalma in you. So the question is such, sure. What are you doing? What do you mean by that? It's obscene. So it puts you in a kind disposition. So, in short, can we do without it? I'm sure that you will answer that we can. That because you already went into somehow bypassing this alienation that language is, but can we do without it?
Yeah. I think that that's for me a very interesting question because in a certain way I would say that no, we cannot do it. But that's the same question for me because it's not really clear to me why it is that we search for this what I would call social recognition or social affirmation of I am that I'm being that I am who I am and also this what would really induce the phantasmatic idea that there would be something in me. What gives that idea? Because it, as I think of it, it cannot come from the fact that we have not. Why do I want social recognition? Why do I need this kind of that somebody is to affirm me all the time? Because I already everything already is there. You are already recognized. So what is this other path that you're going to? And I don't really have a good. I would like to discuss that, but I don't have a good answer. And for me, alienation, which of course it's true that the way in which I frame it becomes a very, it's maybe stupid to call it alienation, but rather, but the idea of redeeming and claiming, because it's of course that's the weird part in which I say, because it's not that I have chosen or that I love you unconditionally, but somehow I am in this position where in a certain sense I'm called to somehow redeem this weird fact that you just address me and I address you, and there's no way, I mean, I can avoid you, ignore you, blah, 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 but all of this will be responses to you. I can kill you, but that's a response to you. So you see that I place this, and that's a kind of an alienation, of course, but yeah.
Thank you. So Nadezhda, Laurent, and
I'll do something really repugnant. I'm going to be pedestrian.
Okay.
You know, it's an anthropological fact that we can't survive without care. Care isn't love, but that's what happens.
Sure.
We have to be accepted. To
Yeah,
survive,
exactly.
Literally.
Yeah.
That's
I think that's true.
That's the point.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons for exactly this social that we want this.
I could now go into casino or something like that, but it's just pedestrian. It's like that.
I agree. Definitely, I agree that there is. I mean, I think that there really are two paths in which this recognition. But that we need care, for instance, that we are dependent on each other. I think that's, of course, it's real, and that might motivate us in all kinds of different ways.
Now species is even more real because we have to survive for the first day.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think Lacan also has a point that whatever lack we as it were find ourselves as subject is never a real dependence. It comes from the symbolic. But I would say that there is that real dependence really maybe functions as this way in which you really need someone to take care of you, and that's a real need that we have, and that function that gives rise to an economy of recognition. But the question is, why does that, let's say, the need to be recognized, the need for dependency, or the need created by dependency, why does that get, as it were, injected with or invested with this search for, as it were, the ultimate recognition? So what's that? And there I would say that the motivation for that, but that's a longer discussion, is not that we lack the unconditional recognition, but exactly the opposite. And then that opens up my perspective. Yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you very much, Niklas. This is what we call thought-provoking, isn't it? Which is absolutely excellent. I wanted to ask you about. Would you agree if I would rephrase what you said, but with a different vocabulary, meaning that you said the impossibility of not being recognized and so on and so forth. Wouldn't that be precisely the obscenity that you are talking about? So the horror, the absolute horror of the encounter that we have to deal with is precisely this, let's say, this kind of unconditional love that we always meet. That's, let's say, the horror. And if it's the case, then, and that would be my question or sub-question, if I can rephrase it in according to that lexicon, then why do you still use the vocabulary of the need? Because it would remain a structural, let's say, I wouldn't say determination, but structural framing, let's say, of the relationship. And I have the impression that this is what you want to do, to show, or to describe to us. Or maybe I've not understood anything.
You said why I still use the vocabulary of need.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Well, there is, I think, exactly this, which was my response to the former. That I think that we have a need. I mean, there's needs of dependency, real dependency. But why those? I mean, why that need? I mean, so we might have. I mean, real needs for getting nurture and things like that. Emotional needs, but that already becomes a little bit weird. What are the emotional real needs that we have, and where does this start? That we start injecting these kind of that. Well, I need recognition for you and all kinds of ways. Where does that start to become? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's, but the structural effect. But saying that it's a structural effect, for me, is not saying anything, because I mean, a structural effect is let's say it's a way.
Solves you of responsibility.
Well, in a certain way, exactly, because it is a meta perspective, and it somehow plays on the idea of a meta language, that there is a way in which you, as it were, step out of the moral existential reality of that thing, and you see, and then you see a structural effect here. But it's a little bit. But anyway, if it's a structural effect, perhaps it is. But you have to somehow deal with. I mean, it's you that has to anyway redeem it, and so something like that. But yeah, it's I guess. Sorry, yeah.
Thanks, Niklas. If I got you right, in you somehow put into parallel this unconditionality of recognition within language, and on the other hand, unconditionality of love. Is that so? Like, okay, I will put a question.
Well,
Let me just pose a question. So for Lacan, like these two things, love and language, are on the, as I understand Lacan, on opposite sides. So Lacan's position would be one cannot speak about love. It's impossible to speak about love. And it is this metaphor of a hand picking a fruit. But once it picks the fruit burns in flames. We are here. This metaphor of flames, it's always like this, the other side, the side of the real. No? So it's again, the moment of love is the moment of this surprise, or it's like so momentary that it cannot be like thought of. Or so this is one thing. The other thing is, my question to you is relation between love and good, the good. I would say that also Lacan's position is a position of ethics, is that the good and the bad are actually a social contract, and they operate like on the level of, I don't know, superego. But I wouldn't agree that for Lacan there exists something as like a universal good. Okay, this is the question.
Yeah, okay. So the first on love, well, it's of course a kind of a, let's say, an empty signifier. I mean, the whole idea of unconditional love. Of course, it's because it's, in that sense, of course, something I cannot say what it is. In that sense, it's something which somehow I am addressed by, but I can't say what it is. So that on that part, I would agree that love is the real here in the Lacanian sense. But also, I would, I think I have a little bit of problems with this notion of love, which is exercised by Lacan and some of the Ljubljana school also, because I mean I know that because it somehow seems to structure itself or kind of gain its power or derive its sense from the idea of falling in love, which is, or infatuation, and it's not that what I'm proposing is agape, something which is, you know, the opposite to eros, but it's in a certain sense, I mean, I wouldn't place love like that at all. For me, I mean, love is something which, I mean, where I'm talking about the unconditional love, it cannot be placed as a phenomenon. I don't think it is a phenomenon at all. It's not an event as such that can be thematized. I think here I would follow Levinas in the idea that the face of the other is not a phenomenon. It doesn't appear as a phenomenon. It's what conditions phenomena in that sense. So in that sense, I think love cannot be, in that sense, a phenomenon, and that's why I have problems with that kind of. So that was, and the good. But maybe we'll talk about the good, because I think that's a longer discussion. So let's talk about that later on. Okay. Yeah.
So now I think I want to reframe my earlier question as an objection, because I do, now I feel like I understand your discourse a little bit more, which is, I mean, it is irrevocably Levinasian and phenomenological insofar as, that is to say, it's like the ground of phenomenality, etc. But I just think, you know, that Derrida demonstrates in Violence and Metaphysics. You know, the point of that essay is that you cannot, just because that we have to be open to another, and just because there is a ground of recognition that's involved in that. In fact, it's undecidable whether it's recognition or non-recognition. And it's undecidable whether like openness to the constitutive exteriority of the symbolic and to the other is grounded in care or violence. It's not an empirical, I accept Nadezhda's question, but it can't be decided. Obviously, it's a metaphysical question. It can't be decided on these empirical anthropological grounds. And so the point of Derrida's demonstration, which then also, you know, Martin Hägglund has an extraordinary chapter disjoining the necessity of discrimination, disjoining Derrida and Levinas, where he, you know, follows up on Derrida's demonstration. And it's, the point is, though, that there's no, you actually can't motivate determining the concept of that constitutive relation as reciprocity or recognition rather than as violence. And it's the logic, it's in fact the logic of the pharmacon. And so you are deciding to do so, and that's why our discourse is theological and Christian. But nothing motivates that. It's actually not, and not even, you can't even decide the undecidability as itself openness or love, in fact. You know, Derrida, I truly believe, demonstrates this in that essay. So.
Yeah, sure. We talked about this undecidability earlier, I mean, a few days ago, and well, I do take the point, and of course, this is, I gather that you could say that there's a certain way in which exactly there's, well, it's hard for me to, I mean, you can describe it from, as it were, the outside as me taking a decision here to make. I have a hard, I mean, because the way in which I try to place it, the way in which I can make sense, maybe this is more, and maybe here exactly the undecidability is a fundamental critique to this idea. The way in which I try to make sense, or what sense it can mean for me to have, to be in this weird position that that somehow we, you know, I'm addressed by you, and somehow it's true that if you wouldn't, you know, respond to me, I would be nothing. And if I wouldn't respond to you, you would be nothing. And is that violence or love? So, but I would say, in this way that it's undecided. I mean, it's in a certain way decided for us that we are put in this position. So maybe that's, let's say, on the level of consistency. That's as far as I can maybe say. That's true. But that doesn't. That somehow, I think, makes then important for us to then go into the level of our understanding of moral life or existential life, what it means to be addressed, how that functions in all kinds of different ways. And then my proposal would be, for instance, that if it's the idea that thou shalt not kill is the first command, then exactly its reverse is what we mostly desire in order to get rid of this, decide that somebody has decided for us something, is to kill the other. And so that's kind of, that's a certain reason for me to place love as the formative thing which we're called to, and not. But maybe you get rid. But I know, I understand. I really hear your concern here. Yeah, sure.
So thank you, Niklas, again for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, everybody. You see, Niklas, you were addressed and loved by everybody. Thank you for the debate.